Hey everyone, it's 10 Types, and if you've not been paying attention, although I imagine most of you know this, the new expansion Spacetime Smackdown for Pokemon TCG Pocket recently came out. It was a little over a week ago at this point, and it's a set that has a lot of really good cards, and it also has some cards that are good for specific decks, some that are good for general decks, and today we're talking about the ones that, in my opinion, are the most impactful and are really changing the game, and they really need to have. Obviously, from the first expansion, or even from before that, but from just the promos, there are cards that you need. And then there are also some cards from the first set that you need as well. And then there are also cards from Mythical Island that you need, right? So there's cards from all the sets that are really good, specifically because this is the early, stages of Pokemon TCG Pocket, but that is especially true for Spacetime Smackdown. So we'll take a look at 5 cards today, most of which are trainers, though I do have one Pokemon here. But I do want to start off with an honorable mention, which is Mars, which I think is a supporter that is pretty good, I guess. I haven't really played with it too much, haven't been hit by it that much either. But it forces your opponent to shuffle their hand into their deck and draw a card, only one card for each of their remaining points needed to win. Theoretically, at the end of this game, this can force your opponent down to a really low hand size and really limit their options. And there is really one supporter and one card that you're looking at the end of the game, maybe another one. We'll talk about them. They're kind of similar, but removing the option for your opponent to play that card can be really nice. But Mars is the card that's absolutely amazing, and also there are a lot of decks in the game that are focused around just having one like big sweeping turn, maybe two at the very end. So at that point, they'll not have really taken points, so Mars won't be particularly good. It'll just be a red card. And then at the point in which they are set up, then they're set up, and then it doesn't really matter if you play Mars or not. So Mars is, I think, a really good card, but one that isn't just good that good right now. There certainly are a number of good Pokemon from this set. As I said, I'm just going to be talking about one, but there are some that are, quite strong, like say Pachirisu EX, Yanmega EX, Dalga EX, Palkia EX, Manaphy. Specifically, Manaphy is a card that I recommend everyone try to get 2 copies of. It's not a super hard card to get, and I think it is one that will be quite good going forwards. Same thing with like a Magnezone and Magneton. These are good cards, but they're not cards that I think are um, really required to have a lot of good decks. But the only Pokemon on the list is actually just Darkrai EX. Darkrai EX is really good in the metagame right now. If you've been playing Pokemon TCG Pocket, I imagine you've been seeing a lot of it. I've been seeing like mostly Darkrai EX, I think. I don't know if Mordex or Darkrai EX or not, but looking at the actual metagame, the most played deck in the game is Darkrai EX and Magnezone. This is currently, I don't know if it's my main deck. It's my main or my second main deck in Pocket right now, and it's in my opinion pretty fun. It's on the slower side, which is kind of weird. Comparing it to say like the another really great deck in the game, which is Pikachu EX. That is a much faster deck. Very different. I think it is still very good, but regardless, you have Darkrai EX Magazine, which is a slower deck. You have Darkrai EX Greninja, which is also a slower deck, and Darkrai EX Weavile EX, which I think is and that might be a little bit faster. Darkrai EX Greninja and Darkrai EX Magzone, obviously the Pokemon that aren't Darkrai EX that are in the name are Stage 2s, so those take a bit longer to set up. Darkrai EX, I guess I didn't say what it does, but its ability Nightmare Aura says whenever you attach a Darkness energy from your energy zone to this Pokemon, and that wouldn't mean if there is energy acceleration, this ability would be triggered more. There is not that you can do to this Pokemon. I mean, you could use like Manaphy or Dalga EX, but those aren't darkness energies, so that wouldn't do it. That would not trigger the ability, but just every turn you attach to it, then you place 20 damage on your opponent's active, which is nice and kind of means that you're getting consistent value attaching to this Pokemon throughout the course of the game and doing also more than your 80 for 3, which is kind of mediocre to underwhelming. Your regular attack here, it's not that bad, but it's not great. 140 HP, again, nothing like absolutely insane. There are a number of basics with 150 that are good and can do 150 as well. So your stats are okay outside of the ability, but the ability is really good. Sit behind Druddigen, which is how I don't believe Weavile EX plays. I haven't really messed with this too much. I've seen it some as well. I haven't like seen it that much, but partially why is because it has cards from both the Dialga EX and or the Dialga pack and the Palkia pack, 2 EXs from both. But the other decks are built around Drogogen, so then, I don't know if built around is quite the right term, but it is a very important card to those decks. You sit behind it and build up damage as they attack into it, and also as you place, or as you attach energy to Darkrai EX. And then you also have some other thing, some ability that you're using in the background, either Magneton or Greninja. And when you're using those, then you're just powering up your board state and your like threat level, and then at some point you'll be able to take um, big knockouts or do something big to like one big knockout or potentially multiple knockouts due to whatever your ability, Greninja, and then you'll be able to just win the game at that point. And that's Darkrai EX decks built around this are the decks that are taking fewer prizes at the beginning of the game, still setting up. One thing I've been playing, as I said, a lot of this deck or decks, and people don't like play super aggressively into it and sometimes hold back. Part of it is because they're also playing Darkrai EX, but you need to make some advances against this deck. You need to actually try to apply pressure. Yes, you don't want to be eating all this damage from Drogogen. That doesn't feel very good, but it still is a thing in which it's Pokemon. You need to knock them out, right? You need to start doing something. I think people will start to get better against playing against it because, as I said, you just can't give it infinite time and or like a bunch of time. Like I feel like people just kind of way back and then they just lose. But yeah, it's a really solid deck. It has decent consistency as well. And yeah, it interacts with some of the new cards really well. In addition to that, and it plays most of the cards that we'll be talking about actually in this video are played, or actually maybe all of them are played in some Darkrai EX build. But this Pokemon, also I should probably talk about Cresselia EX, which is actually a promo now that most people should be able to get pretty easily. And it says when it's like, the same attack here, it is Psychic, which is actually better because you can use like Gardevoir. And I mean, Darkness is not that good of a type looking at the Darkrai EX decks. Most of them are not really Darkness decks. I mean, they play Darkness Energy, but the only Pokemon is Darkrai EX. I mean, Weavile EX is Darkness, but the other builds play Stage 2s of a different type and a basic of a different type as well, or maybe multiple. Cresselia EX that finds itself in a better type, but its ability says whenever you attach a Psychic Energy from the Energy Zone to this Pokemon, you heal 20 from it. In some ways, it's very similar to Darkrai EX. It's kind of just like the opposite of that, but obviously, doing damage is better than healing damage, as you can see from I mean, this Cresselia EX isn't particularly good, I don't think, really at all. I don't think I've seen anyone play it. And then also, if you look at like Greninja, which is really good, comparing it to like Butterfree, which is not that good. And so and there are similar cards. Butterfree actually theoretically would be better in terms of like it heals more damage than Greninja would be doing. Theoretically, it could, but Cresselia is it's kind of like the same as Darkrai EX, and dealing extra damage is amazing. Healing is usually not that meaningful. If you really wanted to, you might be able to do something with this to kind of counteract those like pings from Drogogen or Greninja or Darkrai EX, but Darkrai EX also hits for weakness, which isn't super meaningful. But regardless, this card is very different. The most important thing by far about Darkrai EX is its amazing ability. It does really force you to just play Darkness Energy, so you're not tacking this into random things, but it is a very, very good card, making up really 3 of the top 10 decks. And unless you don't count those decks as unique decks, I think it's pretty set in stone that these have to be 3 of the top 10 decks. I mean, their win rates are like absolutely absurd. They're 2 really highly played decks and have high win rates, which is rare. And there are now, I think, look at this data sample from Limitless. There are enough plays at the upper end, especially like the top deck, to say, yeah, this deck's quite good. Last expansion, we had Greninja, Gyarados DX Greninja, it had like a 56% win rate. Now that's lower looking here by quite a bit. So I will expect the win rate to go down to like 55 if I had to guess, but I think it's still a very good deck. I think it is the best deck probably, or Darkrai EX Greninja. I've been playing that a bit more, and it's really fun. But yeah, it's a card I recommend everyone get. Then we have potentially the best card from the set. I think this is actually pretty clearly the best card from the set, which is Cyrus, which is a supporter. You switch in one of your opponent's bench Pokemon that has damage on it to the active spot. As I said, I've been mostly playing Darkrai EX decks, and Cyrus is like really good in those. So maybe I'm a bit, a little bit too biased. I think this card's like one of the best cards in the game, but from what I've heard other people say as well, it's like absolutely insane. You have something like Greninja, which is played with generally within Gyarados EX and Darkrai EX. Not always, certainly Darkrai EX, but then it allows you to ping any Pokemon you want with Greninja. Pinging isn't like placing damage. And then you're going to be able to Cyrus that Pokemon up into the active spot. Cyrus is like absolutely absurd in this deck. It's a really important part of it. In other decks, like for example the Darkrai EX and Magnezone deck, it's nice if they get pinged by Darkrai EX or Drogogen. It's nice if you're attacking with Palkia EX. It's nice, or Articuno EX as well. You're dealing a little bit of damage to all their bench Pokemon. That damage probably doesn't matter that much. It might, but it's not usually super meaningful. However, it does mean you get damage on those Pokemon, and that allows you to Cyrus and knock those Pokemon out. How important is that? It depends on how the game goes. It might not be that important, to be honest, but it might be as well, depending how the point trade is going, or I guess your point map to be more accurate. But yeah, Cyrus is really good in situations like those. If you're playing with, let's just say, Executor EX, Celebi EX, apparently this deck's like still really highly played. I mean, honestly, I mostly just see Darkrai. So yeah, I don't know. This is just the thing I'm seeing. Darkrai decks, so I haven't seen a ton of Grass or other decks, but Executor EX is able to deal some damage. But only some, right? It's not taking one shots. Let's just say taking two shots. There are a lot of Pokemon that do that, and then you can use Cyrus to finish off Pokemon on the bench instead of your opponent retreating and you never seeing them again, or being able to attack into them again because Sabrina, they're not going to send it up, and they can pretty easily play down another Pokemon. Like some random, maybe not in a list like this. There's only three Pokemon, but generally they'll be able to place down another Pokemon, and so you're never going to see it again, and you're just kind of wasting a turn of damage. And that was a really important part of the game, but now that's something that is twisted differently, where now this Pokemon that's been hit into, if your opponent has a Cyrus, they can just knock it out next turn or really whenever they want. So you're kind of encouraged to heal up even if you are on the bench and commit these resources. So the threat of Cyrus is absolutely insane, but I mean, Cyrus itself is so good, allowing you to finish off Pokemon that are potentially worth multiple points. That's a really big use of it. And then also it is a card that allows you to just it allows you to guarantee wins in circumstances where you might have to spend an extra turn or two, and an extra turn is like a ton of damage. If you're just looking, it's probably like I'll just say 100 damage. So Cyrus is a supporter that kind of equates to that. Comparing like random trainers to damage numbers is kind of bizarre, but that is kind of how I describe it. It is an extra turn of damage, and it's an extra turn which will allow you to win the game. So Cyrus is absolutely insane. It's a card that doesn't necessarily need to be a 2 of in every deck, so like it's maybe not as good as Professor's Research or Pokeball, but this card, it's a game changer. I think the Dialga pack is substantially better than the Palkia pack. You have Darkrai EX, you have Dialga EX. Yeah, the lineup of EXs is like so much better. But the reason to get the Palkia pack is for Cyrus. There are a few other good cards in the Palkia pack, certainly, but Cyrus is like kind of absurd. So definitely a card that you need to watch out for. Keep in mind, remember to play around it to the best of your ability, because yeah, it's an extra thing to consider that's not Sabrina. Still consider Sabrina. Sabrina's not pushed out of the game by Cyrus. I think Cyrus is generally a bit better than Sabrina. Sabrina was a good card. One other thing that we need to talk about with these types of cards, these like gusting or Propulsion style cards. Gust is, if you're not familiar, there's a Pokemon card called Gust of Wind. It doesn't really matter this card, but it is where the term comes from, which says you choose one of your opponent's bench Pokemon, switch it with his or her active Pokemon. This is used to bring in a specific Pokemon to the active, as opposed to like Repel. Repel isn't a card that's really talked about. I don't really know the term for like Sabrina, where you force your opponent's active to the bench. Some people use the term Gust, um, switch out as well, but I'll probably use Repel or Repulsion. There are cards like this. Some people might say Rope or Escape Rope. There's a card called that, but this you don't have control. Your opponent has control, and this is much weaker. Think of like say Iron Bundle in Standard, or there are cards like Escape Rope. I can't think of any others in Standard that really see play, but then Prime Catcher, Boss's Orders. Boss's Orders is very similar to Cyrus. Very clearly like kind of the same thing. And then also the Pokemon Catcher, counter catcher, things like that. They allow you to bring specific Pokemon into the active and allow you to get certain Pokemon that your opponent don't want in the active, obviously maybe to knock them out, but also because they can't attack. Think of a Pokemon like say a Darkrai EX that doesn't have any energy on it. If you're somehow able to get damage on it, um, then you can use Cyrus, potentially use Sabrina to do a similar thing, but Cyrus, you got the control. You can bring their Pokemon into the active spot. They're kind of stuck there. They could use Leaf to get out, but maybe not. They need Leaf, and Leaf isn't like super common. Um, I don't know. It's decently common, but it's not like always consistently a two of in like every deck. Or you could play even more with a bunch of copies of X speed, and people aren't playing two Leaf, two X speed like ever. But Cyrus is a card that can capitalize on maybe your opponent's burnt a lot of those resources earlier on in the game, or maybe they've also decided to um, just do different things. Maybe they want to save it for later. Forcing them to burn resources is generally good. So Cyrus is a card that can do what's called trapping and get a Pokemon stuck in the active that can't really attack, not stuck permanently, but stuck for a little while until they can get out of there. And this allows you to slow the game down. That might be bad. That could actually, maybe you want the game to be moving faster. But if you are playing, let's say, Greninja, you might want to get a Pokemon into the active spot to be able to build up damage on the side of the board through the use of Greninja. So Cyrus is a pretty versatile card. If you played the regular TCG, you've learned a lot about that as Boss Orders is like the one of the most important cards in the game, or that gusting effect. And if you haven't played it, I'd recommend you try it out. If you're playing Pocket, even just to learn more about how to properly use and play around gust effects, as it is a really core feature of the game. Cyrus, as I said, it's a new stable card. There are three more cards though. These are definitely, I think, less important. Cyrus, I think, is hugely important, and Darkrai EX is a card that is a representative of a metagame shift. Pokemon Communication is a really interesting card. I think it's a little worse than I thought. It's like, if you played Pokemon Communication in the regular TCG, it's like a second tier trainer card. A lot of people are asking for a card that would search out evolutions. Pokemon Communication is what we got. It's not, quite that. If you don't know, so what it says is choose a Pokemon in your hand and switch it with a random Pokemon in your deck. The official TCG, you get to actually choose the Pokemon you get out. And in the official TCG, I looked up a lot about this. I was pretty sure I knew the ruling, and I'm pretty sure you can get the same card that you put in the regular TCG. Though I looked online and I just saw some unofficial stuff. Everyone said that you could do that, which made sense. But regardless, in Pocket you cannot. So let's say you have you're playing with Darkrai EX, Magnezone. The Pokemon left in your deck still are two Darkrai EXs, Druddigon. Oh, no, sorry, two Darkrai. I thought there was two versions. Two Darkrai EX and a Magnezone, and all the rest of the Pokemon are in your hand or on the board or whatever. And then you say you have a Magnezone. No, let's say you have a Yeah, well, say you have a Magneton, you send that into your deck to try to get out Magnezone and Darkrai. It will never give you the Magneton. It cannot do that. And in fact, if you have no Pokemon in your deck, you can play. Oh, this list doesn't even play Pokemon Communication. I wasn't paying that much attention, but let's say it does. Then if you have no Pokemon in your deck, you can, I believe, use Pokemon Communication. It'll just like send the Pokemon out into your deck, and nothing will get brought back. So probably don't do that. But anyways, then if you have the Magnezone and the Darkrai, then you Magneton, you will never get the Magneton back. However, if you have Magnezone in your hand, you send that in, it could get you the other Magnezone. That is possible and something that can happen. So do keep that in mind. That is how this card works. Pokemon Communication is obviously random, getting you a random Pokemon from your deck, right? So that's not great odds probably to get what you want, but it can get what you want. And it does help consistency on a similar level to Mythical Slab is kind of what I'd say for Psychic. Obviously, this works for any type. Pokemon Communication is a really solid card, one that I'd recommend you try out in Evolution decks. You don't need to necessarily keep it in the list, but it is something worth playing. Most decks are Evolution decks as well. If you're playing like Pikachu EX, I probably would not play this. That's the only all basic deck that I can think of off the top of my head. I'm sure there are some other ones, but there are certainly some basic focus decks, but all basics are not common. So Pokemon communication is a consideration in most decks. Not necessarily something you need, but something that I would recommend you try out. This is I believe the list that I've been playing for Darkrai EX Magneton or Magnezone, and it's good and it's nice and consistent. I'd recommend you actually try out this list. It's really fun. If you haven't tried it and you have the stuff, it's worth it. But Pokemon Communication is just a one of in this list, so yep, that speaks to how good it is. It's not a card that's necessarily amazing. It's played less than Leaf. Leaf is a moderately impactful card. I said it's not necessarily two of it. It is certainly a two of in some lists, but a card that you can run out of. But Pokemon Communication is a card that is nice. Certainly not as good as Pokeball or Professor's Research in it, and consistency. But it is a card that is nice to have to smooth out your deck, and it is quite nice for evolution-based decks to do into Pokemon in your hand. You really need a bunch of Pokemon in your deck. We see this deck is half Pokemon, so then you'll probably have one. You'll probably have more than you want, but you might not always, so do keep that in mind. But still, it's a really good card, one that you really do need um, two copies of to be able to play in some decks, and I assume it'll be good going forward. I don't actually expect it to be amazing. I think it'll get passed up by other Pokemon search options in the future. I still am expecting a card that gets any random evolution from your deck, but we don't have that yet, right? So this is really good and really important. Then the last two cards I'll kind of group together here. They are the two tool cards, Giant Cape and also Rocky Helmet. I've not really played much with Rocky Helmet or against Rocky Helmet. It's not been played as much, but I've certainly played against it some, and I think with it some as well. And it's an okay tool. It's decent. I think it's underplayed as well. It says if you're hit into. So tools, if you don't know, they are a type of trainer and they stay attached, and they are not very easy to be gotten rid of. I think at some point we will actually see cards to get rid of tools pretty easily. Right now we don't have that. There's like an attack or two, but they're not that good. So the Rotom's okay, but it does not get rid of the tool. But Rocky Helmet is additional damage. Druddigon is arguably the best single point Pokemon in the game. I would not say that that's like a hot take at all. If someone said that, I don't know if I'd say that. It's really close, right? You have honestly, I don't know what I'd say as the best single point Pokemon. I'd actually be interested in hearing that down below in the comment section, and probably need to make another video on that. I'm gonna actually say it's Greninja. I'm not sure. There's a bunch of options. I wouldn't say the Magnezone Magneton line. I don't really want to say Druddigon. I don't think it's super amazing. I think it's a good card, but I don't think it's like the best. Um, but it's really close. And Rocky Helmet gives you the ability of Druddigon, which is a big part of why it's good. It has high HP for a single point basic, but still, it's not absolutely insane. There's certainly Pokemon with more HP, like say Darkrai EX, or that's not a single point basic, but there are certainly more Pokemon with more HP than this, and Rocky Helmet you can just slap on to get some extra damage. Extra damage is amazing. Giovanni is okay doing 10 extra damage. I have not seen anyone play Giovanni since Rocky Helmet has come out. Rocky Helmet is really nice. You don't have as good a control over the damage as Giovanni, but you're probably getting 40 extra damage on your opponent's board. That can set up, like Cyrus plays or just knockouts. Right? It's really nice. On the other hand, Giant Cape says you get 20 more HP. Blue's a card that's okay. It's not that good, but I've seen it from time to time. It's like a tier 3 supporter is I think where I'd say it is. That's okay. Giant Cape's like 20 HP. A little different than Blue. Blue stops damage anywhere. To all your Pokemon. So if your opponent hits you with some like spread attack, it's reducing a lot, but generally that's not the case. It's reducing 10 damage and equivalent to 10 HP. So this is like twice as good. Obviously, you can add more than one tool on one Pokemon. So you can't have Rocky Helmet and Giant Cape. So in that case, you like need Blue if you want the extra like HP equivalent and the Rocky Helmet's effect, but that's not that common. And certainly saying these two cards are like both really good isn't saying they're bad, it's saying they're good. So Giant Cape is a card that is 20 extra HP is quite nice. For the entire game. Again, you can't really like counter this. You kind of can, but it's not great. The Giant Cape helps fix the math a lot of the time. As I said, Giovanni's good, and this is kind of like generally the defensive options are worse than offensive options, but it's better than Giovanni. Um, and so, this card's really nice. This one I've seen a lot. I've seen just a ton of this card. It's played in, for example, Magnezone, Darkrai EX. It's good on Darkrai EX because, you can think of Palkia EX or Mewtwo EX and they hit 150. Even Celebi EX could be hitting, wait, no, Darkrai EX is weak to grass. But on Mewtwo EX, we'll just say. Then if you get hit by hit for 150 by Celebi EX, then you can Giant Cape survive it. So Giant Cape is a card that's played a ton. I don't know if I'd say it's overplayed, but it's played a lot and a bunch more than Rocky Helmet. I think they're both really good cards. I, I think people have been opening more Dialga packs, so people might not have Rocky Helmet. Giant Capes in Dialga, Rocky Helmets in Palkia. And that could be a thing. I've certainly seen a lot of Palkia decks with Manaphy, though. It's probably the second deck I've been seeing, second most played, and it's good as well. But it's very different than Darkrai EX Magazone. But these tools are really good. I mentioned this before they came out. I was like, I don't know how Pokemon's going to balance the tools. I think this can be hard for them not to make them too good, and I think they are too good. So I don't think it's like game breaking, but they're very good. And they are cards that I recommend you try out in lots of different decks. They can provide pretty consistent good value, and are really important. You definitely need these cards. But anyways, in the comments, tell me down below which cards you have found to be the most impactful from the set to play with and to play against. But I hope you enjoy. Consider liking, subscribing, hitting the bell, all that good stuff. And as we said, see you in the next video.